December 12, 1937, 1:37 p.m. The Yangtze River, outside Nanjing, China. The river is calm, unnaturally calm for a country at war. Brown water slides past the hull of the USS Panay, barely rippling against the steel. The winter air carries the smell of mud, oil, and distant smoke drifting from the burning city of Nanjing upstream. Somewhere far away, artillery rumbles like a storm beyond the horizon. But here, on this stretch of river, it almost feels peaceful. Almost. On deck, sailors move without urgency. Helmets are off, jackets are unbuttoned. The American flag snaps gently in the breeze, large, unmistakable, freshly painted on the deck and sides of the ship. Neutral markings, clear markings, impossible to miss. You can almost hear the quiet confidence in the ship's posture. The United States is not at war. Not here, not anywhere. The Panay is a gunboat, yes, but today it's acting as an evacuation vessel. Her mission is simple: protect American diplomats, journalists, and civilians fleeing the Japanese advance on Nanjing. The city is collapsing. The Imperial Japanese Army is pouring in. Reports of atrocities are already whispering through foreign compounds. But the Panay is supposed to be untouchable. She belongs to a neutral power. Below deck, Seaman First Class Edgar C. Hulspas, 24 years old, moves through the ship's interior. He's an engine room sailor, grease under his fingernails, sweat permanently soaked into his uniform. He isn't thinking about geopolitics or empires colliding in Asia. He's thinking about routine, valves, pressure, keeping the ship alive. Like every sailor does. On deck, a few American and British journalists adjust their cameras. They're here to document the Japanese advance, not expecting history to crash into them this afternoon. One of them glances up at the sky, then looks away. Clear, empty, blue. No warning sirens. No alarms. No reason to worry. Then, a sound. At first it's distant, a faint mechanical growl like a swarm of insects far above the clouds. Easy to dismiss. China is full of aircraft these days. Japanese planes fly constantly. But the sound grows louder. Stronger. Deliberate. Someone shades their eyes and looks up again. This time they don't look away. 3 aircraft appear over the river, Japanese Navy HID-1A dive bombers, their wings catching the sun. You can see the red circles now. Rising suns, clear as blood on white canvas. For a split second, confusion ripples across the deck. They won't attack. They can't. This is an American ship. The Panay's captain, Commander James J. Hughes, is alerted. He steps onto the bridge, binoculars raised. He sees the planes. He sees the markings, and he knows something is wrong. Very wrong. The aircraft don't circle. They don't signal. They don't hesitate. They line up. The first bomb drops. It whistles, not loudly but sharply, slicing through the air like tearing metal. There's just enough time for someone to shout. Then the explosion rips into the Panay's deck. Fire, smoke, shrapnel. The blast throws men off their feet. Steel screams. Wood splinters. The calm river erupts into chaos as water geysers skyward. The American flag snaps violently as shockwaves roll across the ship. Another bomb follows. Then another. You can feel it now, the deck shaking under your boots, the air sucked from your lungs, the metallic taste of fear flooding your mouth. The neutral markings mean nothing. The flags mean nothing. The Panay is under full attack. Below deck, Edgar Hulspas feels the first explosion as a brutal punch through the hull. Lights flicker. Machinery rattles violently. Steam hisses from ruptured lines. He doesn't run. He doesn't freeze. He moves. Training kicks in. He and other engine room sailors fight to keep the ship operational, even as bombs tear into her above. Water begins to seep in, then pour, The ship lists. The river, once calm, is now swallowing them whole. Above, Japanese aircraft strafe the deck with machine gun fire after the bombs. Bullets rake across lifeboats, across men, across wounded sailors crawling for cover. This isn't a mistake. This is an attack. Journalists dive behind steel plating, still clutching cameras. One keeps filming, hands shaking, as bombs fall on a ship that officially does not exist in the war. The Panay is dying. Commander Hughes gives the order no captain ever wants to give. Abandon ship. Below deck, Edgar Holspis doesn't hear the words immediately. The engine room is deafening now, alarms screaming, water rushing in like a living thing. He's helping another sailor when the final bomb hits. This one is different. This one is closer. The explosion tears through the hull. Shrapnel rips through the compartment. The force slams Edgar against the steel bulkhead. There's no dramatic final thought, no last words. Just darkness. Just silence. When the surviving crew finally escape into the freezing river, clinging to debris, swimming under fire, the Panay slips beneath the Yangtze. An American warship sunk by a nation America is not fighting. Hours later, as smoke drifts away and the river returns to its deceptive calm, the count begins. 3 Americans are dead. One of them is Edgar C. Holspis, the first American sailor to die in World War II, 3 years before Pearl Harbor. And almost no one back home knows his name. But the question now hangs heavy in the air. Was this really an accident? Or was this the moment the war chose America, long before America chose the war? The survivors reach the riverbank just as the shooting stops. Smoke coils upward from the Yangtze like a funeral shroud. Wreckage drifts past, splintered wood, twisted metal, floating papers stamped with U.S. Navy seals. The Panay is gone, swallowed whole. The river moves on as if nothing happened. Men lie scattered along the muddy shore, burned, bleeding, shivering in soaked uniforms. Some are silent, some are screaming. A few stare blankly at the water where their ship vanished, unable to accept that minutes ago they were safe. Japanese soldiers appear on the ridgeline above the river. Rifles slung, faces unreadable. For a moment, everyone expects more gunfire. Instead, the soldiers approach cautiously, hands raised. Medics follow. It's an almost surreal shift, from sudden violence to uneasy restraint. The same army advancing on Nanjing, the same force whose artillery can still be heard in the distance, now offering bandages to Americans they nearly killed. Commander Hughes stands soaked and shaking, trying to account for his men. Names are called, some answer, some don't. When Edgar Holspis's name is spoken, there is no response. They find his body later, still inside the ship, trapped in the engine room, crushed by steel and water. A working sailor to the end, 24 years old, from Wisconsin, a man who never fired a shot in anger. By nightfall, the survivors are transported to safety. Cameras are still rolling. Statements are already being formed. The journalists aboard the Panay understand instantly. This is not just a tragedy. This is a political earthquake. Within days, photographs and film footage reach the United States. Americans open newspapers to images they aren't prepared to see. An American ship burning, an American flag torn by bombs, American sailors wounded by a foreign power. The public reaction is immediate. Anger, shock, confusion. Radio commentators ask the question everyone is thinking. How does a neutral nation get bombed on purpose? The Japanese government responds swiftly. Too swiftly. Tokyo issues an apology almost at once. They claim the attack was a mistake, an unfortunate case of misidentification in the fog of war. Pilots, they say, believed the Panay was a Chinese vessel. Navigation errors, faulty intelligence. Regret is expressed, responsibility is acknowledged. And then comes the money. Japan offers $2.2 million in compensation, the equivalent of tens of millions today. A formal diplomatic settlement, a clean solution, no escalation, no war. President Franklin D. Roosevelt accepts it. Officially, the matter is closed. But behind the scenes, the truth is far less tidy. U.S. naval intelligence begins reviewing evidence. The large American flags painted on the ship, the weather clear and bright, the prolonged strafing of lifeboats after the ship was disabled. This doesn't look like an accident. It looks deliberate. Some officers privately argue that Japan was testing American resolve, probing for weakness, sending a message, "We will act and you will hesitate." But the United States is not ready for war. The Great Depression still grips the nation. Isolationism dominates Congress. The scars of World War I are fresh, ugly, and politically toxic. Millions of Americans want no part of another overseas conflict, especially one in Asia. So Edgar Halsbus becomes something dangerous. He becomes inconvenient. His death is acknowledged but not emphasized. No national mourning, no mobilization, no thunderous speeches, just a brief line in the news quickly buried beneath economic reports and domestic struggles. The Navy conducts its internal reviews. Diplomatic cables are exchanged. Files are stamped and archived. Life moves on. But history doesn't forget so easily. Inside Japan, some pilots later admit they knew exactly what they were attacking. The flags were visible, the markings unmistakable. Orders were orders. And in Washington, a quiet realization settles in. Japan is not an ally drifting away. Japan is a future enemy, already drawing blood. Yet America chooses silence. Because to speak too loudly would mean answering a question no one wants to face. If this was war, then why aren't we fighting? 3 years later, that question will answer itself in fire and smoke over Pearl Harbor. But when it does, Edgar Halsbus will already be gone, his death absorbed into a larger tragedy, his moment eclipsed by a louder, bloodier beginning. Still, one truth remains. World War II did not begin for America on December 7, 1941. It began quietly on a river in China, when no one was ready to admit it. Washington, D.C. doesn't erupt after the Panay incident. It exhales. Behind closed doors, State Department officials read cables slowly, carefully, as if the pace itself might prevent escalation. Admirals argue in measured tones. Lawyers examine every word of Japan's apology, searching for language strong enough to preserve honor, but soft enough to avoid conflict. Because everyone in the room understands the stakes. If the Panay attack is treated as an act of war, the United States would be forced to respond. Not with protests, not with notes, with guns, with ships, with a Navy that in 1937 is unprepared for a Pacific war of this scale. America's fleet is powerful but spread thin. Aircraft carriers are still an unproven concept. Battleships remain the centerpiece of strategy. Air defense is inadequate. Radar is primitive. Logistics across the Pacific are a nightmare. And public support, fragile at best. So the administration chooses a path that looks like restraint, but feels like denial. Official statements emphasize regret, mutual understanding, diplomatic resolution. Newspapers are encouraged to avoid inflammatory language. Editors comply, some out of patriotism, some out of fear, some because advertisers prefer calm. But not everyone is convinced. Inside the U.S. Navy, officers begin to talk differently after the Panay. War games change. Planning memos quietly adjust. Japan is no longer a hypothetical threat, it is a proven one. The phrase starts appearing in classified discussions. The next time will not be an accident. In Asia, the war is already raging. The fall of Nanjing becomes a massacre. Reports of mass executions and civilian terror leak out despite Japanese censorship. American missionaries flee. Business interests pull back. Neutrality becomes harder to maintain when American lives keep intersecting with Japanese expansion. And Japan notices. They notice that the Panay sinking did not bring retaliation. They notice that compensation bought silence. They notice that America stepped back. This lesson matters because empires learn from hesitation. By 1940, Japan tightens its grip on China and eyes Southeast Asia. Oil becomes the pressure point. Without American oil, the Japanese war machine slows to a crawl. Washington knows this. Tokyo knows Washington knows. The Panay is no longer a headline, but it's not forgotten in military circles. Some officers privately call it a dry run. A test of response time, of political will, of how far Japan could go without consequences. And the answer in 1937 was far enough. Edgar Hulspis's name appears again only briefly, on casualty lists, in quiet memorial services, in letters sent to grieving parents that speak of honor without explanation. His family receives condolences, not clarity. To them, he died in an accident. To history, he died in a preview. As the years pass, tensions stack like loaded weapons. The United States imposes sanctions. Japan counters with defiance. Diplomats smile while fleets maneuver. War inches closer with every peaceful decision. Then comes December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor explodes into American consciousness so violently that everything before it seems to vanish. The burning battleships, the dead sailors, the shock, the outrage. The story gains a clear beginning. But clarity is comforting and misleading. Because by the time Japanese planes darken the skies over Hawaii, the line has already been crossed. The first American blood has already been spilled by Japanese bombs. On a river most Americans couldn't find on a map. Only now, with war officially declared, does the nation fully awaken to what Edgar Hulspis never lived to see. Neutrality was an illusion, and the war had been knocking for years. But there is one final irony, one last twist that makes his death even more haunting. When America finally goes to war, his name is barely mentioned. And yet, without realizing it, the path to Pearl Harbor may have begun the moment the Panay sank beneath the Yangtze. Long before the Yangtze River swallowed the Panay, Edgar C. Hulspis was just a kid from the American Midwest. No headlines, no ambition for glory. He was born in 1913 in a country still learning what it meant to be a global power. His childhood unfolded between farm fields and small towns, where the biggest decisions were practical ones: work, family, survival. Like many young men of the 1930s, Edgar came of age during economic collapse. Jobs vanished. Futures narrowed. The Navy offered something simple and powerful: stability, a uniform, 3 meals a day, and a paycheck his family could depend on. He enlisted not to fight an empire, but to fix engines. Those who served with him described him as quiet, reliable, the kind of sailor you trusted in the dark, cramped spaces below deck. Engine room men rarely saw the horizon. They felt war through vibration, through pressure gauges, through the pitch of machinery under strain. When the Panay was assigned to China, Edgar didn't see danger. Gunboat duty on inland rivers was considered routine, almost boring. The ship had been there for years, flying the American flag as a symbol of neutrality, not force. On the morning of December 12, 1937, Edgar reported for duty like any other day. No premonitions, no farewell letters, just work. That's how most war deaths happen. Not in moments of courage framed by speeches, but in routine interrupted. After the bombing, his body was recovered and returned home quietly. No parade, no national mourning. His parents received a folded flag and official words that explained nothing beyond an incident. In official records, Edgar became a footnote. But footnotes shape history more than we like to admit. Because Edgar Hulspas died before America decided it was at war, his sacrifice didn't fit the narrative. Nations prefer clean beginnings. December 7, 1941 offered one. Before that, the story was messy, politically uncomfortable. So Edgar faded. Textbooks skipped him. Memorials overlooked him. Even many WWII historians mention the Panay only in passing, an appetizer before the main course of Pearl Harbor. But if you trace the arc of events honestly, his death marks a psychological turning point, a moment when America was confronted with the truth and chose delay. And delay has consequences. By the time U.S. sailors would die by the thousands in the Pacific, the warning had long been delivered. It just wasn't believed. Edgar never knew his death would be part of something larger. He never knew the war would come roaring in just 3 years. He never knew that millions more would follow him. All he knew was the sound of machinery, the sudden violence, and the duty he fulfilled to the end. History often celebrates the first shot fired. Rarely does it remember the first life taken. But when we speak of World War II, when we trace its beginning not by declarations but by blood, one name deserves to stand at the very edge of the timeline. Edgar C. Hulspas. Not a hero by design, not a symbol by choice, but the first American to die in a war his country had not yet admitted it was fighting. And that may be the most haunting legacy of all. Years later, the Yangtze River still flows the same way. Brown heavy, unbothered by memory. There is no monument rising from its banks for the USS Panay. No crowds gather there every December. No moment of silence interrupts the river traffic. The place where an American sailor died before his nation acknowledged the war has blended back into the landscape, like it never mattered. That, in a way, is the point. History isn't only shaped by what nations remember. It's shaped by what they decide not to. After Pearl Harbor, America needed a clean story, a single morning of betrayal, a clear villain, a righteous response. December 7, 1941 became the emotional ignition point, a date easy to teach, easy to rally around, easy to justify. The Panay complicated that story. Because if the war began in 1937, then America wasn't innocent. It was warned, it was tested, and it chose caution over confrontation. That choice wasn't cowardice, it was human. The country was tired, poor, divided, unready, but the cost of delay was paid quietly by people like Edgar Hulspas. His death didn't start a war. It revealed one. Today, historians still debate intent, accident or warning shot, fog of war or deliberate message, but the debate itself proves something undeniable. The line between peace and war is rarely announced. It's crossed quietly, by bombs that fall where they shouldn't, by apologies that arrive too quickly, by compensation checks that buy silence instead of justice. World War II did not burst into existence in a single morning. It crept forward, step by step, decision by decision, until the cost of denial became unbearable. Edgar Hulspas never knew his place in that story. But we do. And remembering him doesn't rewrite history, it sharpens it. It reminds us that wars don't begin when we declare them. They begin when someone dies. And we choose to look away.